It's like, why,
I'm trapped in an existential nightmare, caged at the intersection of two mediums which openly reward mediocrity, created for people who want nothing more than such. YouTube, which has spent so long encouraging creators to chase the form of their content, which most resembles a 24-hour live stream of their lives with a minimum production value of coherently watchable, and anime, which apparently encourages CGI crowd shots in the first 5 minutes of every fucking new show. You ever have one of those embarrassing moments where you're trying to show one of your parents anime? Like, hey, this show's really cool, it's got a really interesting plot, it's got like the best character development I've ever seen, and then you put on episode 1 and are reminded what you had forgot, that there is goofy ass CGI crowd scenes all over the fucking show. And your mom just bursts out laughing because she like can't handle this because she hasn't gotten used to this. Don't get me wrong, she's gotten used to the trash style of American reality dramas, but she's got higher expectations of animation made for adults. And I don't mean to say that it's stylistically different and that's bad. If you know anything about me, you know I love the styles of Masaaki Yuasa, Kaiji, Shin-chan, all that other weird Japanese shit. I don't think people really have a problem with that kind of stuff anymore. Everyone kind of gets Japanese culture now. Like, we understand that this is just what it's like over there. It's when you see some cheap looking shit that they obviously wouldn't have made that way if they had the funds or the manpower to do it differently. If they had the fucking time. If they weren't all being run on these insanely tight schedules with these insanely low personnel counts, with these insanely low budgets. Because instead of anime studios taking big risks and trying to lead more full productions, maybe consolidating some of the strengths of different studios, instead of constantly splintering off into new offshoots who end up just doing generic light novel adaptations that don't pick up anyways, trying to make enough of a dime off of their side projects to fund their passion projects and then not being able to, or trying to jump into the passion project too early before they're really fully fleshed out as a studio, and ending up with a half-baked product that only impresses a cult of fans. Where is the confidence in any of the scripts that these people are putting out? If Gen Urobuchi wrote Madoka Magica and Psycho-Pass, and both of those were as successful as they were, why was there not at least a Ghibli budget film attached to that man's writing? Gen Urobuchi had enough hype at the time that people actually did watch this bizarre CG, ugly ass, weird fucking thing that he wrote that is the polar opposite of what I'm saying should have happened. Like, in the 80s, you had Mamoru Oshii, and this dude was directing these crazy cinematic experiences with the second Urusei Yatsura movie, some of the earliest OVAs like Dalos, Gosenzo-sama Banbanzai, and Angel's Egg, which is a fucking art house masterpiece and a classic. And then he gets to step up to Production IG, which is like the forefront of animation quality in OVAs and TV shows at the time. And there he gets to handle Patlabor, and that's a big success. And that's why he ends up directing Ghost in the Shell. And this film is so beautifully crafted that it becomes a worldwide phenomenon and is still celebrated to this day as a classic film, even outside of anime circles. Now, Urobuchi Gen may not be as much of an art house maniac as Mamoru Oshii over there, but the man's global appeal is without peer. This guy was writing the biggest shows year after year, and somehow the industry let him slip away to go do a Kamen Rider show, and then like this awesome fucking puppet show, which I mean, that was just Gen Urobuchi using his clout to do whatever the fuck he wanted. I'm just saying, if you've got somebody who's being considered a superstar in the industry, why aren't you pushing that as hard as you possibly can? Where is the effort right now to try to make a classic anime? A lot of people are looking to Kyoto Animation, and I definitely think that director Yamada Naoko is trying to make her own version of like a classic anime. After showing us the power of her style in K-On! And then Tamako Market, then really giving it a cinematic edge in Tamako Love Story, and then bringing the thunder with a lengthy, heavy drama in a silent voice, with as much polish as you could possibly have put onto the fucking screen. I think this film is a step in the right direction. but I also think it has a lot of problems that come from not trying to adapt the manga hard enough to film. The script is kind of a mess because it has to include too many plot elements from a much longer story. The film is bloated, it goes on a little bit too long, and I don't think it will have a lot of rewatch value for a lot of audiences because of this. It's also got a little bit too much corny teen drama in there. For older audiences, that can be hard to sit through. So while I think Koi no Katachi will be respected as a great film going forward, it's never going to have the clout that something like Akira or Ghost in the Shell is going to have as these big, serious sci-fi dramas that really revolutionized like the entire visual style of cult cinema from that point forward. Meanwhile, Mary and the Witch's Flower is showcasing all the beautiful animation and talented work of Studio Ghibli's artists, but isn't anywhere near as ambitious as literally anything which Studio Ghibli had ever made. This film is the most watered down, basic standard action-adventure children's movie that's ever come out of anything associated with Studio Ghibli. And that's not to say that it's a bad movie, I'm just saying, where is the risk-taking to try to make a classic? So Netflix recognizes Masaaki Yuasa as a massively talented director. Critically acclaimed, beloved cult following, even people who can't really take anime seriously like this guy. They think they have the opportunity to make a really big anime for the West. We'll bring this auteur who has like worldwide applicability to the surface, give him a classic 70s manga property which will mean that the Japanese audience will still pay attention. It's violent as fuck, so American teenagers will absolutely love it. Plus it's got the soundtrack of like Hotline Miami, but it feels like pseudo important in some ways, so intellectuals can kind of enjoy it. And also there's like dramatic narrative elements, so your mom might be able to sit through it. But like they didn't even dub the rap verses into English, and they let it print with the Japanese dub having the most broken English imaginable in it. And I'm just thinking, if you were gonna take this big risk and try to launch this Masaaki Yuasa project, where was the quality control? Why didn't they go all the way on making this the most classic 10 out of 10 show that no one would be able to shut up about all year? Because even though this show has a lot of clout right now, it also has detractors. It has people who are down talking like the overall quality of it, and that wouldn't be happening if they had just tightened up the script a little bit, tightened up the presentation a little bit, made it actually as strong as Masaaki Yuasa's previous work, which is all visually stronger than Devilman Crybaby. Even Science Saru kind of plays it safe. Their first movie is like this weird Ponyo ripoff that totally falls apart narratively as it goes along, with a super bloated final stretch of action scenes. Once again, trying to play it way safer than they need to. Why is everybody tiptoeing around? In the 80s, Hayao Miyazaki made Nazca of the Valley of the Wind. Katsuhiro Otomo made Akira. People still revisit these films all the time. No one has filled the shoes of Satoshi Kon. No one has filled the shoes of Hayao Miyazaki or Isao Takahata or Mamoru Oshii now that he hasn't made a film in fucking forever. Nor has Rintaro, nor has Yoshiaki Kawajiri. Remember the good old days when you could ping the Wachowskis or Quentin Tarantino for a little worldwide exposure to anime? I remember the good old days. Because when you look at those old movies, you can tell that these things were made out of passion. That's the only reason you would ever do this. There's no fucking reason to get into anime for the money. If you treat anime like a business, you are missing the fucking point. Because yes, you can turn a profitable show every once in a while if you roll the dice enough times, but you can also just, go into a fucking industry that makes sense if you just want to work. Like, okay, I'm sure a lot of these animators are just people who love to draw and just want to do that as their job. And it's not like they're making the creative decisions on what shows they get to work on. They're pretty much just taking whatever work they can get. But why in the fuck are we squandering these people's talents by forcing them to draw the same old shit forced drivel that will perpetuate the staleness of this marketplace and to continue animation from breaking into the mainstream to a point where we could afford to fund these animators a little bit more? So meanwhile, I'm over here like, hey, the background characters in Sword of the Stranger look like shit. And I got people being on me like, all anime has stuff like that. That's just the nature of the medium. Oh, well then I guess all anime looks like garbage. Wait a minute, I seem to be having a flashback to a scene from Ponyo, where there were 3 huge boatloads of people and all of their faces are drawn accurately. Sure, not in much detail, but accurately. In fact, every face is drawn accurately in that movie. It's almost like it's possible to draw every face in a movie correctly before it comes out. Let me posit a theory as to why the background characters in Sword of the Stranger did not have their faces drawn correctly. The key animators had finally finished all the fight scenes, everything was laid into place, there just needed to be a lot more time for rechecking and polish. But since the film was essentially done and the good looking parts look good, because most audiences probably won't recognize this level of discrepancy in quality, but it's going to be far enough above what they are used to, and there's going to be enough obviously impressive stuff that overall the movie will be impressive. It's only when you watch the movie hella baked and you go back over it with a fine-toothed comb, because you're in the middle of like a gigantic comparison of like the visual craftsmanship of every anime film ever made, and you really scrutinize it, you start to be like, huh, actually most of this movie kind of looks like shit now that I'm looking at it. And then you stop, and you look up, and you ponder towards the stars. You see a face appear in the stars, and it's that of Clifford Lee Sargent, host of Better Than Food book reviews on YouTube, reminding you, as he does in every video, that life is too short to read bullshit. And you wonder, what if I only have 10 more years? I don't know what's gonna happen. Will I be caught up on Berserk when I die? Will Berserk be over? Will Hunter x Hunter just admit that it's cancelled so we can all stop worrying about it? Will I have finished my DVD collection or my manga collection? Oh god, there's no way I'm gonna finish my video games. I haven't even seen every Miyazaki film yet. Check this out. So a few months ago I made a list of like every single film that came out in the 70s and 80s, as well as every single 80s OVA, because OVAs only came into existence in 1984. What I have found is that the 80s was in fact the greatest decade in anime history. That's because over the course of this decade it seemed as though what was incentivized was to make the best possible product. Hayao Miyazaki showed up in cinemas in 1979 and then started one-upping himself every couple of years. Otomo wrote a masterpiece manga and then adapted it into a masterpiece film himself, setting the stage for the globalization of anime. Madhouse is established and starts cranking out art films. OVAs, after they started to really pick up steam in like the later 80s, just got crazy with their production values and experimentation. Really edgy and unique directors were being given free rein to do whatever the fuck they wanted. Urotsuki Doji happened. If you haven't seen that movie, consult your doctor before use. It is not safe for work, but it is visually my favorite anime of all time, probably. People were just going fucking crazy. Japan had a bubble economy. Home video was insanely expensive in Japan, but people fucking wanted to watch this shit because it was good, so they would pay out the ass for it. Americans were so desperate to watch it that they were acid washing subtitles onto fucking VHS tapes and distributing them across the continent to anime clubs just so people could watch Urusei fucking Yatsura. All the cliches that we still follow were created back then. Rumiko Takahashi defined what rom-coms were going to be. Akira Toriyama defined what shonen action shows were going to be. Magical girls started to solidify in their definition. And this is not to say at all that evolution ceased in this decade. The 90s had Evangelion and the birth of experimental TV anime. It also had its own fair share of really interesting OVAs. However, after that bubble economy crashed in the early 90s, a lot of that money went goodbye. You compare the average 80s OVA with the average 90s OVA and you're going to see a noticeable dip in quality. Great stuff was still being made both in OVAs and in films, and even on TV. But as all the money left the home video market, and the entire world is gearing itself towards streaming because that's how everybody consumes everything now, in just a non-stop drip feed of as much content as they can possibly consume, not really caring about the level of quality, mostly concerned with filling their lives with as much crap as possible. In that industry, crafted work does not thrive. OVAs that aren't tied into an existing franchise are dead. Anime films are struggling to hold on after they lowered the bar for themselves considerably at the end of the 2000s. We've got people doing interesting stuff. Kizumonogatari is like an anomaly that this is possible, but good luck finding any of it after you dig through this just endless torrent of new crap that's getting cheaper and cheaper every fucking season, and there's way more shows and way more studios every time I look at a mal list. I don't even think this is a terrible season. I enjoy Pop Team Epic, I enjoy Mitsuboshi Colors. I mean, these are cheap shows. They're mostly carried on their laughs, and like, comedy is going to survive in a landscape like this just fine. It can thrive in simplicity and abstraction. Probably why my end of year lists are almost always overloaded with comedy shows. Because spending 5 minutes watching Galko-chan or I Can't Understand What My Husband Is Saying, even though it's cheaply made, it's got a real strong, real sincere concept behind it. It doesn't just feel like mass-produced garbage, and it's not insulting you by taking up 25 minutes of your time making you look at something that isn't really sold on a visual component in the first place. And goddamn if they didn't finesse it as much as they could while keeping it cheap. The color choices were perfect, the character designs looked great. This is like the perfect modern anime, in a way. But most of what's going on in anime is way overblown concepts that are way outside the realm of what can actually be produced by these companies. Usually based on a source material and trying really hard to invite that audience to the adaptation. Like, if I start up a show and the first thing I see is a CG crowd, you've already lost me on entertaining me as a new viewer. So you need to hope that I'm either the kind of really hardcore anime fan who's just gonna give every fucking show a chance because I have nothing better to do with my time, or I better like care about the source material. Anyone outside of those two categories is not going to look at this show, and if the show is not good on top of that, no one's gonna buy it either. What I don't get is it wouldn't even be hard to like change the nature of what people are producing. If a producer walks up to an anime studio holding a light novel, there should be someone there to slap it out of their hands and then slap them in the face and tell them to get that fuck shit out of here and bring on that good shit. And those people need to come back with something with a little bit more originality and spark and obvious marketing potential to a group outside of the tiniest fucking niche imaginable. Like, why do you have to make anime for anime fans? Do you actually want to be working on these fucking shows? Did anyone get into the anime industry so that they could work on Death March to the Parallel World Rhapsody? I think not. They shouldn't have to make that show. We shouldn't be subjected to that show. That show blows dick out of ass. Why don't you get on the internet? Go on Pixiv and find some artist who does all their stuff in like this really specific aesthetic that's really popular. Maybe like a vaporwave kind of look, something that's really in and trendy with the hip young fucking kids. Match that up with a screenwriter who's proven themselves with some cult hits and make something low key with it. You don't need to make a fucking action show to sell to an American audience, or any foreign market for that matter. Those are just the only ones that anyone's fucking tried to sell. You don't have to make it look like anime. Every so often some weird little offshoot thing from Japan kind of catches on to like at least a little cult following. Like Bananya. Like a lot of people watched Bananya. This stuff actually has some like appeal to regular people. Pokemon Company realized that they needed to make their designs a little less anime. A little bit more broad and universal, colorful and daring. I wouldn't broadly categorize the characters in Pokemon Sun and Moon as looking like anime characters, but I also wouldn't categorize them as the opposite. And I feel like these designs have gotten a lot of shit from the anime community because they are less appealing to some of that community who wants anime to look more anime. But I really think that these new Pokemon designs are just way more striking from a design perspective than the older ones. When you look at Ash, Misty, and Brock, they look like they come from a much more dated media franchise than the pocket monsters who have remained far more relevant over the course of the last 2 decades. You don't see plushies of the characters from Pokemon, you only see the monsters. And that's because even though the character designs in Pokemon are generally fairly stellar, they didn't have as much of a universal appeal. Meanwhile, this latest gen has some of the most popular girls in Pokemon history. And they're not just popular in Japan or with an anime fan audience, they're popular with gamers as well. because they don't just look like anime characters, even though they are. They're just a new and inventive and exciting type of anime character that has a more broad influence. This is what happens when animators do as Hideaki Anno famously advised and look outside of anime for inspiration. The anime industry needs to stop copying itself because itself is a failing industry. Itself has been trying to determine what content is safe and then produce as much of it as possible, with results so inconsistent that the practice is questionable in the first place, and all trying to milk dry the same core audience who can't possibly have enough money to fund 60 fucking shows every season. Anime needs to consolidate and diversify. It needs to try to appeal to more people, and it will have an easier time accomplishing this by consolidating its talents, instead of spreading animators thin across an infinite myriad of shows, all with complex production schedules and clearly diminishing budgets. Or otherwise just going too far and needing an editor like Violet Evergarden. Why didn't anyone tell them that the depth of field thing was going way the fuck too far in this show? Whatever, some people probably like that shit. Look, I come from the land of YouTube, where the sun is not shining and the grass is not growing. Everyone's losing money. The people in charge of the website keep making decisions that ultimately hurt content creators, and in turn hurt the audience by making it more difficult for the people who make quality content to continue living, and making it easier for the people who make shit content to churn it out ad nauseum. It's a sinking ship, at least for the time being. If the tide can be turned and YouTube can make decisions which will allow them to reinvent themselves and grow into a creator-friendly platform, maybe there's a chance we can all make an even better living off of this than what we currently do. But right now everybody is really struggling to grow, everyone's struggling to maintain ad revenue without significantly watering down their content, and everyone's teetering on the edge of just getting deleted off the fucking platform, or secretly blacklisted from monetization because you were a little bit edgy or something. And yet in spite of this, all of the YouTubers coming into the game right now are trying to do the same old shit. Everyone's chasing search engine optimization. Everyone's watching the current news shows as they come out, commentating on whatever becomes a big deal, making podcasts, analytical videos, reactions, whatever they can to milk as many views out of every new cultural product that dawns on the shore. And they're all doing this even though they've been slowing down, because they still see growth and they still make money. But if the trend isn't on the upswing, don't you think you should just move into a different market? I view Devilman Crybaby as symbolic. Masaaki Yuasa teamed up with Netflix because he realized that it was not in his best interest to market his show to a niche audience of Japanese anime fans, nor even to the broad general public of Japan. He knew that the best way to market this show was internationally, because it was a product and he geared the product towards that audience. And while Netflix did not keep up their end of the deal and make sure that this show actually made sense for a global audience, nonetheless, this show matters because it does not take most of its influence from other anime. It does not feature stock assets. It does not feature stock character designs. It is not limited by what is allowed to be shown on Japanese TV. And yet, it is tuned in to what people actually want right now. Even though this overwhelming level of sex and violence is not permitted on TV, it is what people want right now. We are in a culture of increasing sexual openness. An adaptation of a classic manga about the apocalypse comes out just a couple of weeks before the doomsday clock is set to 2 minutes to midnight. This is strategic marketing. This show is not only poised to succeed at this time, but it's been attached to a visionary artist who was passionate about creating it as he was a fan of the original. I want to see a Masaaki Yuasa original on Netflix next, and I want to see more budget put into marketing it. Devilman got out there in such a way that most people were aware of it, but Netflix hasn't capitalized on the hype nearly enough. Why aren't there quotes from, say, million sub YouTubers right there on the page telling you that, like, people are hyping this shit? You can just use my video title, it's basically a tagline. You know, the way Steam does to sell games. If Jimquisition Animation's clout is enough to sell an indie game to the point that it turns a profit, and they put a reference to him in the game just out of sheer respect. When do I get credit for hard selling half of my audience on K-On? Oh wait, you mean there's no convenient way for me to actually pay for my favorite anime of all time? Kyoto Animation could give me a link that I could put at the end of my videos. And I could say, if I've convinced you that this show is baller as fuck, and that they deserve to take all of your money, follow this link and click this button that will give them $5. Probably make a few $1,000s off of me making one video. I make a few $1,000s off of me making one video, and all I'm doing is talking about the show. You don't even have to pay me to do this. I will do this for free for my favorite shows, but I will not peddle a fucking piece of plastic garbage. I'm sorry. I just found out about a YouTube competitor called DTube that pays you for watch time in cryptocurrency and counts watch time in terms of how much money you made. I'm gonna check that out. I'll put a link below. Let's see if we can topple the organized systems together. Fuck YouTube! Hell, I can even let my buddy Hentai Samurai post on there since it's got NSFW enabled. And my wife can come too. She makes YouTube videos now. If you just want to hear me bitch and whine about the anime industry some more though, then click all these other links on screen and watch everything else on my channel. This is all I do. I either smoke weed and watch good anime, or I smoke weed and watch bad anime and wonder why I'm not watching good anime. That's the life for me. Goodbye.